Well, thank you all for coming back. And one person I forgot to thank is Jared Reese. As you can see, he has been helping me all morning, and I've really appreciated it. I feel like I've had somebody there all the time. The other person I'd like to thank, Dan Gray, for giving me a ride so I could be here. So I appreciate that. I hope the sessions have been valuable for you. Yes? Good. And you remember at the opening remarks I made, I asked you to talk with how many people? 10. Oh, well done. And raise your hands again. Those of you who are going to do it, you know, that's almost, some people are raising 2 hands. That's great.
I think they'll do
that
20.
means 20 people, you know. I would like to invite Jared. He's going to, Jared Reese. He's the chair of the St. George Planning Committee, and he does a super job. And he's going to introduce our next speaker, final speaker. Shall I leave it there? Thank you.
As I am the committee chair for the St. George Rally, just again, November 8th, put it in your calendar. Would love to have you participate, whether you come down or whether you participate via Zoom. As mentioned earlier, UCAP has been sponsoring conferences such as this for several decades. We take great care and devotion to our mission, these conferences and your time to be here. We want you to know that we carefully select, vet all the speakers for this conference, and we reiterate the value and safety of their messages you will hear today. If any of you receive flyers on the way in regarding one of our presenters, we are satisfied that our vetting process has been correct and ask everyone to contribute to the peaceful and uplifting space we aim to create. Dr. Leavitt, Chelom Leavitt, has pre-recorded her remarks. At the end of her presentation, she will join us remotely to answer questions. The QR code posted now will will take you to the form where you can submit your questions. We will post it again at the beginning of the question and answer session. Now an introduction of Chelom Leavitt, Dr. Leavitt. Dr. Chelom Leavitt earned her PhD at Penn State and focused her research on healthy relationships and sexuality. She is currently an associate professor in the School of Family Life at BYU. She has been published in all the top academic journals in her field and blogs regularly for Psychology Today. She also teaches a validated curriculum to couples, therapists, and relationship educators on how to improve romantic and sexual relationships and create more meaningful connection. Chelom's research has included people from many religions and cultures. She is studying the cultural acceptance of sexual mindfulness intervention in her current sabbatical. Chelom Leavitt.
Hi all, I am Dr. Chelom Leavitt. Really excited to be here at the UCAP conference. I am going to just give a short presentation and then leave most of my time just for questions. I'm going to give kind of a brief overview of what healthy sexuality is and maybe a little bit about what it isn't, and particularly how it applies to relationships, marriages. I think that you all have access or could have access to a 3x5 card. If you would like to think about a question and then give it to the moderator, I will then be able to answer those questions. So really a pleasure to be here with you. And I'm really delighted that UCAP does this and that this is such an important conference for ideas about help and healing that really do bring hope to our relationships. So I'm going to share my screen with you, and we will begin. Hey, I want to give you just a second to take this picture in and realize what good is happening in this picture, right? This child is watching a really loving example of parents who are modeling for this child what physical affection and love look like in a relationship. Some of the things that we hope to see as our children are young and they are learning about sexuality is a number of things. These are the ideals, right? That we want to teach children to appreciate and love all aspects of their body as a beautiful gift. We want to teach them to have awe and wonder about our body's ability to reproduce and to become bonded to a partner. Very important that we're designed that way. And then also teach them to recognize the pleasurable and arousing feelings that come with sexuality. That is how they're designed. And learn to control these feelings through awareness and self-mastery. Okay, this is really important for their own development. And avoid attaching fear and anxiety to sexuality. Anxiety really shuts down learning. People cannot learn when they have high levels of anxiety or stress. So really important for us to present healthy sexuality in a calm, comfortable, open atmosphere. Okay, a little more on that. The goal is we really want to be engaging children's curiosity, not their fear. We don't want to be making sex a fearful thing or a shameful thing. So instead, what we want to do is encourage good questions. That's a great question. I'm so glad you're curious about bodies or about how bodies function, right? We don't want to discourage what they're asking, right? And children are naturally curious. So saying things like, you're too young to ask that, or that's not an appropriate question. We can certainly help guide and model what a little change in their question might be, but we certainly want to answer their questions as they come up for them. We want to ask them questions, right? We want to talk to them about elements of their body that they should be aware of, right? There is a difference between men and women. Let's talk about that and why they're different, right? And this last question actually comes from an experience I had with my two boys as I was driving them to school. There was a really inappropriate billboard that was there, and every day we would pass it and I would try to distract their attention away from it. And finally I realized, that's not really realistic. I need to help my children understand and digest their environment. And so I asked, how did you feel when you saw that lady with very little clothes on? It brought up a wonderful conversation where we were really able to talk about a lot of the values that we held in our family surrounding sexuality and relationships. So it's a very interesting part of research that shows us that parents who do create this warm, comfortable atmosphere and are open about talking about sex, the terminology, sexual development, a sexual relationship, who can model that in a comfortable way, that conversation, those parents and children, the children are much more likely to adopt the parents' values. So this is an important thing. A lot of people say, well, I'm afraid if I'm open about talking about sexuality, that I'm encouraging inappropriate behavior. We actually know the opposite has been shown in research. If we're open and comfortable and give good information to our children, they're actually less likely to engage in risky sexual behavior and more likely to adopt the family's values. We want to talk early and often. This is something that starts when they're very little. We give them impressions about how to view their own body right from the get-go when they're little. If they learn the correct terminology and we're really matter of fact about that, those children develop healthier esteem about their body. They're more likely to be able to resist when someone does engage in something inappropriate. And it's really an important way of helping them learn to develop without shame, without this unnecessary burden of misinformation. All right. We also have to attend to the unique personality of our children. Some are more open and willing to have this conversation. Some are a little less so. For those who are less willing to have this conversation, we really need to encourage them, right? I often give the example of brushing your teeth, right? It sometimes feels funny when children first learn to brush their teeth. It feels prickly and maybe they don't like the taste of the toothpaste or the texture. But we wouldn't say, okay, if this is uncomfortable for you, never mind. We won't brush your teeth until you feel comfortable. No, instead, we would do things that help them get accustomed to it, align with this, healthy behavior. So the same thing is true with getting comfortable with talking about sex in an appropriate way for their age group, right? And so we want to slowly help our children see that this is a comfortable topic. We are very matter of fact. We are not embarrassed. We have good information. We're a trusted source of information. All right. And we also want to help them understand that as they move into being more sexual, or in that their sexuality is developing through maturation, we want them to understand this is something to celebrate and not to be ashamed of. And that's kind of tricky during that age where they're feeling quite awkward and self-conscious about so much. And so really, I'm giving you just the tip of the iceberg, the highlights on, what we think the goal is for children. But truthfully, we could have a, couple hour long conversation about this. But what we really want to focus on right now is relationships, adult relationships. So hopefully we had this great foundation from youth, but research tells us that about 80% of us did not. Sex was either approached in a really shameful way, a punitive way, or it just wasn't spoken of at all. It was just silent, which also creates an awkwardness and a discomfort with the topic. So we want to be really aware that the majority of us come from backgrounds where sex is kind of a difficult topic that feels uncomfortable. It feels like it's a little bit taboo. It creates some anxiety in us. And there's good reason for that, right? Our culture has been one that encourages kind of the shame and the awkwardness around it. One last point is that we want to make sure that we focus on, with our children, that we focus on the do's rather than the don'ts. We want to encourage a positive attitude towards sexuality. And truthfully, anything can be turned from a don't to a do if we just try. In my family, one of our values is that we encourage our kids not to have sex until they're married, right? Until they're in this loving, committed relationship. So instead of saying, don't have sex before you're married, I could say, sex is a really beautiful, powerful element of our being. And we know that if we wait to use this powerful tool in our life until we're in a committed, loving relationship, then we know not only from our own values, but from research that we are more likely to have a happy, healthy, vibrant sex life, but also larger relationship. So really, waiting to have sex until you're in this committed relationship is a total bonus. It's a total positive. And it's something that as a family, we would encourage, right? There's a way to make this what could be a negative message and turn it into a positive message. And then also, we don't want to talk about body safety or abuse or porn even at the same time that we're discussing healthy sexuality. And the reason is it's a very important topic to talk about body safety, porn, and sexual abuse, but we don't want it to be conflated with healthy sexuality. We want our children to be able to digest the message of positive, healthy sexuality that's happy, creative, a wonderful part of how they develop. And we want them to keep that separate from all of these negative, hard conversations that we do need to have. These are realities, but we want to give a little space between the two so that our children can understand that this is what we're aiming for. And these are the things that we're trying to avoid. All right, so let's talk about how healthy sexual attitudes and teachings, knowledge, all really contributes to a healthier relationship. Too often, we feel that conflict in our relationship is a problem. It's something that indicates something is going wrong. And I want to suggest that conflict is actually an opportunity for greater intimacy. Conflict is natural in a relationship. We are two different people with very different perspectives, and that's great, right? We can celebrate those differences. But of course, that's going to create a little conflict at times. That is very different than contention. Contention is more hostile and it kind of creates more distance. It's more, I'm right and you're wrong. Conflict is we recognize that we're different, we have different perspectives, we maybe even really disagree on something, but we're trying to understand what's underneath your perspective or my perspective. Who is this person that I am married to? Who am I? Why did we come to the conclusions we did about different elements of our relationship? This is particularly important in sexuality. Too many couples feel that if they have sexual differences, or even just different perspectives, which men and women are bound to have different perspectives on sexuality, but so many couples feel that it's a problem. And instead of approaching it as, here's something that we need to tackle together, we feel like we're at odds with each other, that this is something that creates distance in our relationship. So I'm here to suggest that we need to do a little paradigm shift and understand that when we are having problems in our relationship, whether they're small or whether they're large, we need to understand this is an opportunity for us to actually draw closer to one another, to know more about this person, to dig underneath the surface and really understand what's at play. What are the emotions that are going on? What's the history or the culture that contributed to our different perspectives? And how can we find a solution that actually works for both of us? Okay, so that's the first principle or the foundational idea that I would ask you to consider as we talk about healthy sexuality within a marriage. So as we're talking about porn today, I thought it would be important that this is one of those issues that often creates huge problems in marriages, as it should. This is not a healthy behavior, and yet it is still an opportunity for us to increase the intimacy even within a marriage if both partners are willing to work towards that. Let's talk about a few things we know about porn, right? Porn is often an effort to fill a void. It may have come because of a lack of knowledge from childhood and that we never really had anybody that we could ask weighty questions of, or that we could go to with our concerns or even our curiosity. And so, unfortunately, what we know is when children do not have answers to their questions, they go to one of two sources: peers or the internet. Both of these are terrible resources, particularly on sexuality. So oftentimes that is where children have been introduced and maybe start to develop a habit of looking for porn to answer some of their questions. Again, this is a terrible source of information about sexuality, about healthy sexuality. Okay, we also know that in porn use, intimacy is really lacking. You're interacting with a virtual or a depiction of people engaging in sex or some act of sex. And there is no emotional connection. We're not relationally connected to these images. And healthy sexuality is always other focused. Healthy sexuality is about being concerned about the needs of my partner, and they are concerned about my needs, right? That is something that we're sharing, right? It's reciprocal. So intimacy is really lacking. And so when people are trying to fill this void, thinking that maybe they'll gain some intimacy or they'll be able to resolve some unmet need, it never pans out, right? Porn is this fake relationship with sexuality. It does not bring connection. It does not bring intimacy. Okay, it absolutely harms relationships. We know even when couples are supposedly both engaging in it, it has some negative long-term effects, right? We feel less connection. The relationship is less stable. We start considering attractive alternatives, which is just a way of saying we're looking outside the relationship. So these are all destabilizing effects of porn. Okay, we know that communication also can decrease. All right, so the antidote we know is creating greater intimacy, greater emotional intimacy, greater relational intimacy, learning about healthy sexuality. When my parents described this happy, healthy, joyful experience that sex is in a healthy relationship, and then I compare that to the distortion of porn, children who have learned about happy, healthy sexuality are more likely to reject when they see porn, right? When they're exposed to it, because it just doesn't even feel the same. It's almost like we're pre-arming our children or ourselves against this negative image of unhealthy sexuality, right? In fact, Viktor Frankl said, porn is impersonal sex, right? It's something that is devoid of the relationship, of the intimacy, of the sacrifice that it takes to create this healthy connection with another person. All right, and we have to be careful to make sure we put responsibility where responsibility belongs. The spouse is not the cause of porn use. The individual must take full accountability and get help, right? That is where the healing starts to happen. If that is happening, then there is hope that this couple can continue to be vulnerable and work through this issue and create deeper intimacy learn about what healthy sexuality is and what it isn't, so that they can move closer toward the ideal, right? Being open and vulnerable with one another. Okay, the spouse might also need some help depending on the level of the breach of trust. And that's important that both spouse, both partners get the help and the support that is needed through this process if we are to keep working toward a healthy relationship. Okay, so how do you prepare yourself for the hard conversations that this kind of a topic is going to require? Or just even talking about healthy sexuality. For a lot of people, that is difficult, right? Because as we know, the majority of people have not been brought up in this open, loving, healthy environment where sex is talked about quite matter-of-factly and in this healthy way. So how do we start to have these difficult conversations, whether it's about a problem that exists or about getting on the same page about what is healthy sexuality? How do we implement that into our relationship in a more consistent manner? Okay, first of all, we got to be calm. Like I said earlier, nothing is learned when we have high stress or high anxiety. One way that we can work on being calm is by just taking a few minutes to meditate, connect with your own breath, connect with your body, settle down. And then the next part that really builds on that is understand what it is you're feeling. Understand where you feel things. Some of us feel emotions in our head or our heart or our stomach, right? And so understand what the emotions are that you're feeling and learn to regulate those, right? Kind of sometimes we have to down regulate. And sometimes for people who have tamped down their emotions so much, they need to learn to upregulate, right? We have to allow our emotions to surface a little bit so that we can have a conversation that's full of compassion and kindness and understanding. Okay, and I like to talk about the 24-hour rule. Now, the 24-hour rule is when I feel kind of triggered over something or that something hurt my feelings, I'm a little offended, I need to try to sort it out myself. That helps me take responsibility for what I'm feeling and see if maybe, was this just a bad day? Am I highly emotional? Did I maybe misunderstand? Can I see this from a different perspective? Give myself 24 hours to work through this. Then, if I'm still feeling a little off balance or like things aren't resolved for me, then I go back to my partner and I say, you know, when you made this comment the other day, I've been thinking about that, right? And then we have a conversation together. But it gives us time to kind of calm ourselves and regulate our emotions. We also need to be really clear about what the issues are that we want to talk about. If we're wanting to talk about how to implement more healthy attitudes towards sex in our conversations, then let's say that plainly. Let's not hint or be vague about what it is we're feeling. A lot of times we know it's helpful to journal. Journaling is actually quite therapeutic, and people who journal have a clearer understanding of what they themselves are feeling. All right, so healthy sexuality within a relationship. What we're really talking about here is that both partners' healthy needs are being seen and met, that we can talk about those, that we can be open and vulnerable, we can speak up when we feel like a need isn't being met, and we can respond to our partner in love and kindness. Okay, I often talk about belonging and becoming. Both are very important elements of how we develop as individuals and as a couple. Belonging is really developing my own autonomy, that I have things I want to strive for, I want to develop, I want to grow and attain in my own life. I am an individual. but I also want to be part of a couple, which means there is an interconnectedness, which means there has to be some give and take for how we operate as a couple. A lot of times there's a little tension between belonging and becoming. Some people overemphasize becoming and don't have enough belonging. Some people overemphasize becoming and don't have enough independence or individuality. It's really important that we also recognize that both becoming and belonging can be distorted. If we distort becoming, we may be very competitive, manipulative, even domineering, right? We might like to control things. That's a distortion of becoming. Belonging, a distortion of that, is being overly clingy, overly dependent on our spouse, or not being able to make decisions for yourself, even decisions about safety. A lot of people get so enmeshed in relationships that they can't get out of an unhealthy relationship because they're so dependent on that. So we want to be careful. Are we both becoming and belonging in healthy ways? All right, and I like to throw this question out there because it's a little bit of a paradigm shift. What if the goal of marriage is not just to make me happy, but to make me develop into a whole person? Okay, so much of our culture tells us that marriage is intended to just make us happy. And if we're not happy, if we're not in love all the time, then there's something that's wrong with us. Well, that's not necessarily true. And we know this from research as well, that people who understand that this conflict that sometimes we have, these differences in perspectives or desires, are actually quite healthy for us. We see how we actually impact another person, and that too is healthy for us. We likely need to make adjustments. That's going to encourage us to stretch and grow and become a more complete person. We see this in sexuality so often, that differences in perspectives on sexuality or differences in desire for sexuality create some contention in some relationships instead of allowing that conflict to create more intimacy. I'm going to dig in and we're going to understand each other better. Why is it that you have a high desire for sexual frequency? Or why is it that you have a low desire for sexual frequency? Could there have been things in my family, my culture, my own thought process that contribute to those things? And if I understand those if we understand those as a couple about each other, we can then know each other better and draw closer to one another. We are really witnessing each other's lives. And this is an important part of that, is saying, this is who you are. And I am going to try to understand this, certainly challenge you at times, and I hope you do the same for me, but we're always going to do this with love. It's not with an effort to try and figure out who is right and who is wrong. Unless, of course, all of these things that I am talking about do not apply to relationships where there is abuse. Abuse takes it out of any of these categories that we are talking about for healthy relationships. Abuse is destructive and absolutely has to have intervention and possibly even a separation and leaving that relationship, right? Only if both partners are making strong efforts to have a healthy relationship can we actually find this kind of deeper intimacy and meaning in the sexual relationship. So this really brings us back to this idea that conflict is the opportunity for greater intimacy. We deepen our relationship when we understand that differences don't necessarily mean we have to create distance in the relationship. Now, I will say, as far as the topic of today, porn is one of those issues that has touched most families, whether it's something that you just stumbled upon and it had a negative effect on you, or you've made it more of a habit. Porn is something that if you will recognize and take responsibility and accountability, it can be overcome in most instances. We know that therapists are very valuable in this process, support groups, having people who understand this clearly and are supportive of the process. But we have to take accountability in order to have healthy relationships. So I'm going to open it up for questions now, and I hope that any of these issues that I have just kind of set out in general can be clarified for anyone who does have questions.
Chelom, are you with us, Dr. Leavitt?
I am with you. Yes.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Appreciate that. Appreciate you taking some time then to join us again and answer a few questions.
I'm delighted to.
Yeah. I have some questions that are coming in here. What do you do when kids have sex before marriage, or if having it before marriage isn't a value for you?
Well, if it's not a value for you, then it's not going to be as much of an issue as long as your other values are being maintained, right? Which is generally what most people would be concerned about is this a loving relationship? Do you feel like you can speak up and have your needs heard and met? So I would say teaching our children to have a strong voice, regardless of what the values are, is really important.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I'm reading questions as they're coming in, so if you'll bear with me for just a quick moment. How do spouses find a healthy sexual relationship when one has no desire and the other one has a lot?
Yeah, that's actually a fairly common question. And so when we have this disparity in sexual desire, we really have to kind of understand what's underneath this. It may be that there are different meanings that we've ascribed to sexuality. Oftentimes we see, and research supports this, that when there is very low desire, and sometimes when there's no desire, I will note an exception to this, but oftentimes it's because there are unhealthy feelings that have been internalized about sex. We feel like sex is dirty or shameful, that it's something that good girls don't engage in. And those are things that we really have to check ourselves on. Have we adopted some of these unhealthy attitudes because of our culture, our family upbringing, whatever the issue? We do know that in a very small percentage, mostly women, there is a small group that does feel no desire for sex. However, in those relationships, we even see couples engaging in sex because both partners understand that it is important to the relationship, particularly to one partner, and it creates more intimacy and closeness. So when there is a big difference in desire, oftentimes what I think most therapists and most research would point towards is, let's see what else is happening in the relationship that might be creating this dramatic difference in desire levels. There may be an issue that the partner with low desire doesn't feel valued, doesn't feel heard, doesn't feel like their needs are being met. So again, this requires that we take this little bit of conflict and dig underneath to really see what's going on in our mind, in our emotions, in the relationship.
Very good, thank you. Here's another question. How do you navigate a dating relationship with someone who struggles with or has struggled with pornography in the past?
It's a great question. I get asked this quite a bit. This is really a two-pronged answer. First of all, are they going about the things that need to happen for them to overcome this, right? Are they getting the help, the support? Do they acknowledge it? Are they taking responsibility? And then secondly, the partner of the person who is struggling with this really has to ask themselves, is this something that I can deal with? Is this an issue that I feel equipped to kind of constantly help, support, work through with in my relationship? And that's really for the individual to answer. Everybody will be different. Not everybody is equipped to deal with a porn habit or addiction.
Okay, thank you. Maybe this kind of ties into what you were just saying, but how do I know if I'm in a place to enter a healthy relationship if I'm still struggling with porn use?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good question. I think, first of all, the fact that you're asking this is a very good sign. I think we need to just question ourselves and say, am I really making the authentic strides to overcome this? Do I have healthy attitudes towards relationships where I am willing to see the impact that I have on another person, make adjustments? I always talk about in communication, repair is the most important element of communication. So when we're talking about where I struggle or any element of our relationship, can I see where I need to repair in my conversations? I have often hurt my husband's feelings unintentionally and maybe even sometimes intentionally. And when I see that, the healthy response is to go and repair, correct what the misunderstanding was, or correct what my intention was.
Thank you. This goes along with that. This next question is looking at your 24-hour rule. What if when my husband waits 24 hours before discussing something that hurt him actually hurts me more and causes more anxiety to my anxious attachment?
Yes.
That's a good question. Yeah.
That's a great question. And I'm so glad that you brought up anxious attachment, because likely that is what's going on. In fact, I just had a young couple who came to me after a presentation last week and asked this very question. And I said, you know what? Here's an opportunity that's actually going to challenge you both. If he's taking some time to kind of sort through his feelings and you're feeling quite anxious about it, here's an opportunity for you two to use a little mindfulness or settle yourself down. Here's an opportunity for you to take account for your anxious attachment, and you will grow too. If you can say, hey, this is fair that he needs to take some time to work through whatever it is he's thinking. That's a healthy response to conflict. I too need to do things that are healthy to promote this strength in the relationship.
Thank you. This next one, it looks like it's kind of in two parts. There's some physiological and then some emotional part to the question. What if, as a result of hormonal changes, needed medication, or anger, a spouse withholds sex? How do you deal with this in a healthy way?
So withholding sex out of anger is just simply not healthy. If we are angry, we need to address what is the problem, right? We try to work through it on our own, and then we bring our partner into it and talk about the hurt feelings, what the problem is. What I see too often, especially in midlife, is that couples have been dealing with this for so long that they've fallen into this pattern of just creating distance between the two of them. And they have let sex be a tool that actually creates a wedge instead of an opportunity to create greater intimacy emotionally and physically. Now, the other part of the question was, what if it's hormones or some other, maybe aging? I'm not quite sure if they're saying they then withhold sex. Again, you wouldn't want to withhold sex, but you would want to talk about, here's why I'm not really feeling in the mood. Maybe it is some physical changes, and we need to accommodate for that. But it doesn't mean that we avoid the intimacy of this issue. Okay, that's really likely what's going to create the healthiest elements of the relationship, is that we acknowledge this problem and we hit it head on together. If it's hormones, how do we work around this together? If it's the quality of the relationship, how do we start addressing the problems, rebuild trust, and create greater intimacy?
Thank you. This next question almost sounds like it might be a question for the end, but I'll forget it by then. So I'm going to ask it now. But this presentation's been great. What other resources outside of this presentation could we look at?
Well, I know UCAP has a whole bunch of resources. I too have resources. I have a website that's just my name, chelomleavitt.com. We use a lot of research in our blogs on this website. I also blog for Psychology Today. What I really like are the presentations that I get to give when it's on a particular topic, and I generally advertise those on my website as well.
Okay.
There's also some books, I guess I should mention. One is kind of geared towards an LDS audience. It's called Sexual Wholeness in Marriage. And then there's another one called A Better Way to Teach Your Kids About Sex. But we have a general audience book coming out soon, and it will be on Amazon. And again, I'll advertise that on my website.
Thank you. How do you get to a mindset where you are open for greater intimacy during conflict?
That takes practice. One of the things that I also research is mindfulness, how we can slow down, be a little more attentive of what's happening in our body. A lot of times what we suggest is take a short break, maybe a 20-minute break, get a drink of water, meditate, go on a run, whatever it takes, whatever helps you kind of calm yourself, and then come back to whatever the issue is. One activity that I really encourage in interventions that I teach is that couples can decide on a topic that they want to discuss, and then take 10 minutes of a walk and just walk in silence. And then for the rest of the walk, go ahead and talk about whatever the issue is that is troubling you. What we find, and there's some research that actually corroborates this from the UK, is that couples who kind of get into a steady, elevated heart rate where they're focused on their breathing can actually start to work through problems quicker and more smoothly.
Thank you. Would you remind us I just had several questions come in about children. You mentioned a book, A Better Way.
A Better Way to Teach Your Kids About Sex.
Okay.
And the first author is Laura Padilla Walker. I'm one of the authors, but that's who you would look for.
Okay. Thank you. If we do not have understanding or experience of healthy sexual relationships in our own lives, how do we teach our children what a healthy sexual relationship looks like?
Right. You've already taken the first step. You've come to a presentation like this. In fact, this whole conference probably gave you lots of ideas for how to have more open conversations. Oftentimes, it's important for parents to practice with each other. If we're really nervous about having this conversation with our kids, we feel like maybe we're going to stumble with our words, we're not going to have the right answers, practice between the two of you, or practice in the mirror, answering some of these questions so that you can reduce your level of anxiety and speak from a place of love and calm, so that our kids, that's the message and the environment that they start to feel whenever sexuality is discussed. That this is a beautiful, happy topic, and that as parents, we're delighted to answer their question, right? It's so interesting to me that during teenage years, when our kids most need our help to be good guides, because sexuality is a real part of their life as they mature, so often that's when our relationships are the most distant. And so we really have to make sure we have a close relationship with them and we've practiced. And if we don't know the answer, admit that and say, you know what? It's a great question. I don't have the answer, but I'm going to find it out for you and I will get back to you. Then our child doesn't have to go some other place to get information.
Thank you. We do have a question from our online audience.
Yes, the question is, how do I bring up porn addiction when starting a dating relationship? What and when is appropriate?
Yeah, I think that Elder Ballard actually gave some really good advice on this a few years ago, and he said this is something that likely needs to be brought up, but not on the first or second or third or fourth date, likely. We really need to give this relationship a place, time, space to develop and know, is this even a person I am going to invest in? And do I trust them to be honest and open about these very sensitive topics? So I would say, yes, you probably do need to bring it up as you get more serious. I pretty regularly have students in my office who are asking this question, whether they're fearful of getting involved with someone who has been exposed to porn, or they themselves have had an issue and they're wondering when to bring this up. We have to have a level of trust and commitment and know that we want to move forward with this person.
Okay, thank you. It seems like in general, women need to feel loved to have sex, and men need to have sex to feel loved. I'm going to phrase that as a question. And if that's correct, why is it not talked about directly?
Well, unfortunately, because sex just is not talked about very much. I just barely gave a lecture yesterday on the topic that women actually need to feel higher levels of oxytocin in order for their bodies to even respond to sexual arousal. All right, so that means there needs to be a lot of cuddling, kissing, emotional conversation. And unfortunately, we have not emphasized that in our discussions about sexuality. It's been very male-centric. And so we need to be much more knowledgeable about sexuality so that our young couples, most especially, can set good patterns right from the get-go, where they're using a skillful knowledge of sexuality to create this bonding and closeness that couples are hoping for out of sexuality. So yes, men do love to have sex. We know men have higher desire in every study that ever was. On average, men have higher desire. But men also very much respond and feel greater satisfaction when their partner is having a good experience and feeling arousal. So I don't think we need to pit men and women against each other. We need to learn to work together.
Maybe a follow-up question. This isn't from here, but I've heard you speak in the past. You talked about how women's arousal takes time, men are pretty quick, and you've talked about how there's actually reason behind that and how that actually works in a relationship. I don't know if you remember what you shared there, but it was good.
Okay. On average, men take about 5 to 6 minutes from the beginning of arousal to orgasm. On average, women take about 20 minutes. What's really unfortunate is there was a survey just a few years ago that asked, how long was your last sexual experience? And the answer was, on average, 6 minutes. Okay, so that tells us some really disturbing news. We are not taking time for women to actually feel the arousal they need to actually experience pleasure and then reach orgasm. So what's often happening is that we focus on the man. The woman doesn't have her needs met. She doesn't feel very rewarded, and her desire goes down. And so we really have, if we want to have good, solid, healthy sexual relationships, we need to take more time. We need to talk and really understand how each other is feeling arousal, and be unashamed about sharing these lovely, connecting conversations with each other about sex. Unfortunately, we know from research, most couples aren't even talking about sex. They may engage in it, but it's almost emotionless and connectionless, and that's unfortunate.
Very good. Thank you. Dr. Leavitt, we're out of time. We're going to wrap up our conference, but again, wanted to thank you for taking some time to answer some questions.
Pleasure. Thank you, Jared.
Thank you, Dr. Leavitt. That was really great. I enjoyed that very much. I want to thank you all for coming. You know, one of the things that UCAP has found out from feedback from people like you is we've not only saved marriages, but we've actually saved lives. And I remember these two 15-year-olds coming up to me after one conference and said, our bishop took us last year to your conference, Pamela, and then one of them, Jeremy, said, you know, I was about to take my own life because I didn't know what to do, but you gave me hope in that conference. And he said, I finally had the courage to talk to my parents about it and got the help that I needed. And now I want to live. And there's so many kinds of different feedback that we've got. We like for you to give feedback, to let us know exactly what you missed today or what we could do better today. I think it would help enormously as we take those recommendations from you very seriously and base our next conference on that. As one woman was leaving a couple of years ago, she was crying, so I quickly went up to her and asked, you know, may I help you? And she said, I don't know what I'm going to tell my family. I told them I was going to go shopping, and she said, I lied. And I put my arms on her shoulders and said, no, you didn't lie. You shopped for information. And did you get that information? And she said, oh, yes. I said, why didn't you just stop at a shop along the way and buy a pair of hose or candy or a treat for the family or something? But no, you didn't lie. And she just smiled and gave me a hug. So we don't know always the effects that our speakers have had on the audience, but we hope you have been touched. We hope you have learned, and we hope that you are eager to go and share with those 10 people within your family and your neighborhood. And the person who put 2 arms up, you've got a charge to do 20 people now. But thank you so much for giving of your time. Don't forget the St. George rally. Don't forget to give us feedback. We appreciate you spending the 1st of March on this lovely, beautiful weather and spending it with us. Thank you so very much.